Very warm welcome to the Ideas Factory. We are back after a break, and a very warm welcome to you, Harsh.
You too, Nagma.
So we've taken a break, and now we are back with all that's happening around us. And the first episode, we shall be looking at the new Biden administration settling in and a reversal of a lot of policies which were the hallmark of the Trump administration, be it the immigration policy or the pitch of America being back in the world, or the whole globalist approach, and now not America first. Along with that, the China-US relation in that context, because as President Biden settles down in Oval Office, his constant effort, or rather challenge, is to differentiate his foreign policy from that of Trump era. And the US-China relation is a very important factor in that context, as well as the India-US relationship, the China-India disengagement that is now taking place. And of course, we look at Myanmar. So there's a lot to talk about. And Harsh, let's begin with what's happening in America now, and all that is being changed. Biden has announced time and again that America is back, and America has a good intention of taking everyone together and be there for everyone. It's just not America first, but a globalist approach. In this regard, we've also seen a decision regarding the immigrants and allowing people from Mexico, the asylum seekers, to come in. First batch of about 25,000 people coming in as soon as probably the 17th or 16th of this month. So there's a lot of change and reversal of the policies which were in place and which were defining the Trump administration, like Remain in Mexico. How do we look at the new administration and its approach towards the world?
Well, when Mr. Trump came, he signed a number of executive orders reversing Mr. Obama's policies. And I think Mr. Biden has taken it a step forward, given the number of executive orders he has signed. So clearly, I think the attempt in the first 100 days at least is to showcase how different this administration is going to be from its predecessor. And I think the challenge was huge a challenge continues to be huge for Mr. Biden, partly because till today, the impeachment proceedings were also undergoing in the U.S. Congress. So clearly, Mr. Trump is not, fully away from the media glare. The discussions are still about Mr. Trump to a certain extent, and for Mr. Biden to get things done in the U.S. Congress was a big challenge. So I think in some ways, what by signing those executive orders and by rushing through a number of these policies, reversing a number of these policies, Mr. Biden has been signaling that a new era is there, and on a number of issues, whether it is immigration, whether it is climate change, whether it is even on economic and health measures. There is a new administration. There is a change in the offing. So I think broadly, he has been able to give a sense of a new direction. Some of these policies need to be better articulated and need to be better defined. But I think clearly he is, from the very top, he's giving the sense that that there is a new administration there in Washington now. The challenge, I think, going forward would be on a number of these policies where there is lack of clarity. How does he define that? How does he define the specific operational details, and which I think will come as the administration settles down. But as I was saying, we have just concluded. America has just concluded the impeachment process as well, so that will help Mr. Biden finally to take Mr. Trump away from the political discourse, perhaps for a short time. And now with Mr. Trump not also being on Twitter, there is also some respite there, that he's not constantly poking his nose in the policy sphere. Perhaps he'll find different mechanisms to do that, because he clearly has indicated that he has no plans to go away. But I think for Mr. Biden, it is certainly going to be. He wants to concentrate on the economy, on the health, and the larger issues that the domestic sector is facing. And you may recall, one of the things that he and his administration officials are saying constantly is that every single of his policies should be measured by what it does to the American middle class. So in that sense, I think Mr. Trump lives on in his own way. and also I think in the US-China dimension, where
Absolutely.
they have made it very clear that they are going to be equally tough, if not more, on China.
Yes, Harsha, like you've earlier pointed out, that Trump is gone, but not Trumpism. Trumpism is there to stay. So Mr. Biden has inherited a society, an American society, which is very, very divided. And a lot of people feel that the whole promise of bringing America back again, or back together, from Make America Great, or America First, how delusional are both of these. Actually, we've seen one, but even this one of bringing America back again, back together, is that possible at a time when the society is very divided on many fronts, and we've seen that those divisions have become deeper. The whole movement against Trump also divided the society further.
Yes, and I think that was a big worry for Mr. Biden. And I think if you look at his response to the whole impeachment process, which he, from which he kept himself at an arm's length, I think is an indication that he really does not want to involve himself in the nitty-gritty of, what happens to Mr. Trump. His response has been very lukewarm in
Mhm.
many ways to the whole process, and partly rightly because an already divided polity and a fractured society. He has come in the office saying, I want to bring the country together. But the longer this impeachment process, the longer the shadow of Mr. Trump
Yeah.
looms
Yes.
along, I think it would have been difficult for him. So it has been, I think, in some ways a blessing in disguise that the process itself just got concluded in a matter of few days. And now both the US Congress and Biden administration can move on. So yes, I think there is the challenge of bringing together a highly polarized society, a highly divided society like America is certainly going to be huge for Mr. Trump, for Mr. Biden, and I think the challenge also to to define his policies in those terms, because clearly this aspect of uh, domestic dysfunctionalities becoming so overwhelming over some of the strategic requirements will require someone, I think Mr. Biden is very well suited given his long experience in the American politics and given his own centrist middle ground in American politics. But I think the challenges are huge, and he recognizes it. And I think the way he has sort of looked at the Trump factor in politics, and the way the lessons that he seems to have learned are an indication that he's not averse to absorbing some of the tendencies of Mr. Trump in the larger policy discourse, which I think are going to be useful in the way he frames his discussion. And as I said, the middle class, the American middle class, how that is going to be resurrected, that I think is going to be a key theme, both in his domestic and foreign policies.
So, like you said, he has inherited a very polarized American society. He's also inherited an intense US China rivalry. Uh, though his constant struggle, strife is to, differentiate his foreign policy from that of the Trump era and carve out a new foreign policy, maybe the approach would be different, especially as far as US China is concerned. And even though Mr. Biden has had a long experience in the US administration, the China that he's now facing is a very different China from what he'd seen earlier. It's more belligerent, it's more powerful. He talks of a multilateral approach to tackle China and not the go it alone policy that Trump was talking of. But how much room does he really have to move away from the Trump era China policy?
I don't think there is, I don't think there is going to be much of a difference in the way he and his administration would approach China. And I think already the indications are very clear. I think he would like to at least project is that there is a greater structure in place to confront China. And so this decision to create a task force on China, which will look at the comprehensive challenge that China poses to America, that is an indication that perhaps he wants to take a more structured approach rather than the ad hocism of Mr. Trump. But I think in broad strokes, the challenges that the China is posing to the US and its interests remain very similar. And I think if you would have heard the Secretary of State Tony Blinken's testimony in the US Congress, he was very categorical that some of the things that he admitted that perhaps Mr. Trump was right in taking on China in the way he did. So I think there is a sense, even within Biden administration, that they don't really have an option but to stand up to China and across the board whether it is technology and trade or whether it is strategic matters, whether it is allies. Mr. Biden is a big votary of multilateralism, but the idea that the allies in the Indo-Pacific, for example, are all clamoring for a more robust approach to China. So in that sense, perhaps they would ask, even the allies would ask him to be cognizant of what Mr. Trump was able to achieve. For all of Mr. Trump's go it alone posture, I think in Indo-Pacific, his robust standing up to China did generate a lot of confidence in smaller states that perhaps America is not going to go away from its responsibilities in the larger Indo-Pacific. So I think if you look at the first conversations that Mr. Biden has had with the Chinese president, if you look at some of the stance that his officials have taken on issues from human rights to economic matters, I think there is a clear continuity here. And the continuity is also, as I said, in the earlier on, that this is also about when it comes to economics, this is also about how to resurrect American middle class, how to resurrect American manufacturing, American hinterland, which feels that the Chinese onslaught have actually deprived it of all kinds of opportunities. So I think there is a greater understanding of this. There is a greater understanding that foreign policy and domestic economic policy have to go together. There is also a sense that if you have countries like your partners, which clamor for a more robust approach, you have to stand up. So I think over a period of time, we are going to see a distinct continuity there. The strategic challenge is the same. And once the administration articulates a broader China policy, which they are in the process of undertaking at the moment, I think we will see definitely that nothing much will change as far as the basic template of America's China policy is concerned from Trump to Biden.
Yeah, so the basic policy, nothing much would change, and there is no room to change that. And as you said, within the Biden administration, also there is a feeling, there's a sense that it cannot change much. We'll come to the Indo-Pacific approach, the robust approach there a little later. But I just wanted to know in a couple of points, what was Mr. Trump able to achieve as far as the trade war and taking on China was concerned? I mean, a couple of points from how did he, or was he able to rein in or contain China?
No, I think he was, China, you cannot, I don't think China can be contained in a matter of years. I think it's a longer term challenge for the Western world, in particular for America, that wants to restore its primacy in the Indo-Pacific. But I think what Mr. Trump's lasting legacy would be is that before him, there was a sense that perhaps China could be incorporated into the global order. That there was still a sense till Obama that you can bring China into the international institutions, you can bring China into the larger global normative sphere, and China would play ball. I think once Mr. Trump entered the scene and he started castigating China on economic matters in particular, and China's own belligerence, China's own aggressive stance on a number of issues made it very clear that that was distinctly not a possibility that is likely to happen in the near term, that China really is on its own path, both in defining its own national interest and also defining the parameters of the global order. So I think there was a larger conflict between the Western-led system and the Chinese-led model that China wants to, or at least aspires to create and continue with. So I think that the focus that perhaps Mr. Trump brought to the China question allowed not only America, but also the other Western countries to look at China, to start looking at China differently. So there is a better understanding today in terms of what the China challenge, if you will.
Yeah.
That China's that the issues that China is posing for the world are huge, and it requires a concerted effort. Now, Mr. Trump's approach was go it alone. So in that sense, perhaps he could not leverage some of the other Western countries. But I think in the Indo-Pacific, for example, his clear articulation of the Indo-Pacific policy. Before Mr. Trump, there was no Indo-Pacific policy. It was pivot to Asia first under Obama, and then strategic rebalance to Asia Pacific. Under Obama, under Trump, Indo-Pacific policy was articulated, and there was a sense that American defense posture in the Indo-Pacific needs to be robust enough to challenge China on a number of issues. And they did challenge China on Taiwan, for example, in particular. And if you look at the last days of Trump administration, the issues of Uyghur Muslims, the genocide. It was termed as genocide. So I think in that sense, the discourse got sharpened, and there was a focus on China's domestic vulnerabilities, domestic issues, and the larger pressure on the global order, which was absent before Trump. So I think that is the legacy that Mr. Biden inherits, and in some ways he has been using it to his advantage now, because that's a pressure that you can build upon China and make a case to China that, look, certain things can't continue, and your bullying behavior will be resisted by various countries in the region, and
So,
led by the US.
yeah, so he was successful in at least building that pressure on China. And, the focus was on China and the aggression and the threat that it posed to the multilateral order. Now, here, would you say the basic difference is, the whole approach towards China would be more on alliance building and partnership as a bulwark against China rather than the go it alone, and especially in the Indo-Pacific, he's made it very clear that the Biden administration, India and US have discussed the importance of cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and expanding the regional cooperation, including through Quad. So what would we see, in terms of the cooperation here in the Indo-Pacific region, changes or a new approach? How do we see that?
It was very interesting, Nagma. You know what? The readout from the telephone conversation between Mr. Biden and Chinese president mentioned that that Mr. Biden talked about Indo-Pacific. Now you can imagine a discussion where the Chinese don't recognize the Indo-Pacific as a concept. So it was very, I think, an interesting way perhaps to articulate the difference between the two sides, that America is now really going all out as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. A concept, a term that the Chinese refuse to recognize even today. So clearly, I think that the divide has sharpened in the last few years. And for while Mr. Trump can claim that he went it, that his approach was on his own, on America going all out on its own, the reality was, I think, perhaps more nuanced, because if you think of Quad also gained ascendance under Mr. Trump. So, it was not as if America was doing it all on its own. And I think American officials, at least, American bureaucracy, recognized that, we can all claim to be going on our own, but the reality is that we have to partner with countries. The the idea of Quad, the fact that it got that resurrected under Mr. Trump, and the fact that, in Japan, Australia, India, and others have been trying to come together at an operational level, is an indication that Trump or no Trump, the recognition has always been there that ultimately the China challenge will have to be managed by various countries, like-minded countries coming together. Now, what I think will happen or likely to happen under Mr. Biden is that process itself is going to get accentuated. It will get greater vitality because it will have the support of the top leader. It will have the support of Mr. Biden. So clearly, I think perhaps, and we are already, I think there are discussions that leadership summit level meeting of Quad is going to happen very soon. So we are going to see a greater operationalization, greater robustness in Quad, in Quad Plus, other actors that are willing to engage on this issue of the Indo-Pacific with a sense of greater robustness, and they may be, some of the resident countries like Vietnam, Indonesia. They can be countries in Europe, for example. We have now France and UK, of course, but we also know that Germany and Netherlands, countries like Germany and Netherlands, have also articulated Indo-Pacific policies. So there is a big shift happening in terms of accepting the logic of the Indo-Pacific, as well as other countries, like-minded countries, trying to come together to make a case to China that the balance of power needs to be more stable than perhaps China would like it to be.
Absolutely, and most nations all around the world, actually, COVID and the vaccines being developed thereafter have been the focal point around which the foreign policies and the domestic policies have revolved. We've seen vaccine diplomacy too, and when we talk of China, we can't, of course, forget how Trump again and again, pointed out how it was all because of China that the world suffered. And now with the vaccine being in place, we've also seen vaccine diplomacy starting with India. And it was very interesting to see that the recent tension the farmer agitation, the Canadian Prime Minister's comments on the farmer agitation, and hence after which there was a tension between India and China. All that kind of seemed to dissipate after Trudeau's call for the vaccine, and praising Prime Minister Modi, and then Prime Minister Modi promising that he will send the vaccines to his friend Trudeau. So how do we see, the vaccine diplomacy in place? In fact, the couple of articles also talk about the US worrying about India, China indulging in the vaccine diplomacy.
Yeah, I think vaccine diplomacy and health diplomacy, if you can broaden the term, has been a very important feature of Indian engagement with with the rest of the world for the last 10 odd months. Uh, when the crisis was starting, India, had started using its nodal power in the global, pharmacy manufacturing capability to leverage it much more effectively. So India was exporting emergency medicines. India was exporting PPE kits, very early on, and trying to signal to the world that India remains engaged with the world, even at a time when other countries perhaps were not. They were looking more and more inwards. India was trying to make a case that it was, it is linked to the outside world. And now that there is a vaccine, I think the manufacturing of that vaccine and the supply of that vaccine has become an integral part of Indian diplomacy. I think, that perhaps is something where you use a crisis as an opportunity, and Indian diplomacy seems to have made good use of a crisis in leveraging some of India's strengths here, which are certainly a sector which certainly is the dominant, is the flavor of the year, or flavor of I think the month, if you will, in some ways, and farm and. The role that India plays in the as a global pharmacy hub has been appreciated by by everyone, including the UN Secretary General, when he says that India is clearly the nodal point of our global efforts. So I think India's ability to leverage that to a certain extent, both in its neighborhood as well as in its extended neighborhood, and going beyond that to countries like Brazil and countries in Africa, and now countries like Canada, etc. There is a sense that perhaps this idea that at a time when leadership was missing, when at a time when countries are drawing up barriers, India remains one country that is open to external engagement. That despite its constraints, is being despite the massive inoculation program that it's carrying on within its territories, it's still willing to engage with the rest of the world on this very important health matter. So to project itself as a provider of global public health, I think that has been a very important endeavor, and to some extent, I think India has been successful in doing that. Of course, there is an element of competition. When you have multiple players in the market, you always get that competition. In China, Russia, Western companies will always be there to compete. But by and large, I think the messaging from India seems to be very consistent throughout the crisis, that India remains engaged and India remains willing to help those who are perhaps the most vulnerable. So one hopes that it pays, in some ways it also shapes, India's, it also shapes the world's view of India as perhaps a rising power, and as a power that is more responsible than, say, some of the other rising powers in India's vicinity.
Yeah, and a final comment on the situation in Myanmar, Harsh. Will we see a restoration of democracy, civilian rule sometime soon? There are large-scale protests that are going on in Myanmar, but along with that, what has happened recently? What difference or what kind of chaos would it create in Myanmar? Because we'd seen a lot of business opportunities and foreign powers coming into Myanmar when things were normal. But now, would it actually lead to also a withdrawal of investors, businesses, and also expedite China's expansion there?
Yes, I think it is something that the military junta in Myanmar perhaps will have to relook at. This is not the same world. This is not the same country that used to exist, say, a decade back. And clearly, the pressures on Myanmar are rising, and we know Biden administration's, especially specifically a tough stance on democracy. So there is a sense that sanctions will increase and sanctions will put pressure on a regime that would like greater investment, that would like greater external engagement. The trick here is, I think they seem to be relying at least partly on China's benevolence, on the role that China perhaps can play in the UN Security Council, and in also alleviating some of the economic concerns. But my sense is that there is the pressure that the junta will face domestically will continue to rise, because once people get a taste of democracy, they will protest and they will resist the temptation of the military to come back to power. So the sense that you are getting is that already there is some movement through back channels, negotiations that are happening, but how fast that will achieve the results remain to be seen. For India also, this is a very, very important neighbor, and also a neighbor where India would not like to see complete isolation of the military. Complete use of sanctions, for example, can also be very blunt at times. It's not entirely evident that sanctions have resulted in great degree of efficiency and the desired end results. So in that sense, India would also like a more balanced approach, so that China does not become the only country that gains access at the end to the military. But I think much would depend on how the local people of Myanmar react, and they are reacting very vociferously. They are challenging the regime, and they are making it very clear that they are unhappy with the state of things. So one hopes that the junta would listen, and that the Myanmar would restore democracy as soon as possible. But I think the larger global pressure and the larger regional pressure seems also to be working in the same direction. So it's likely that we might see some positive outcome very soon, because the consequences, the costs for military junta are also rising, and they will have to balance the costs of their marginalization and long-term marginalization versus some of the benefits that might accrue to them in the short to medium term.
Absolutely. Both India and the US have stated very clearly that the rule of law and democratic process must be upheld, but India has been a little more cautious because there are security concerns also, especially from the context of the northeastern states. But thank you so much, Harsh. On that note, we'll have to end this conversation here for this week, but see you next week with much more to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you.